just after recording myself and my mom. Good morning, everyone. I appreciate you being here. My name is Daquan Lawrence. As you can see, I'm a graduate student at Howard University, and the title of my paper is African Development, Democratization, and Welfarism. Can African Theory Contribute to Development in Africa? Please forgive me for my hoarse voice. I actually been put to sleep until around 5 a.m. And I decided just to get sleep, just to be able to have energy for you all. So,
you want your mom to hear that?
yeah, it's okay. Thank you, bro. So yeah, thank you for the platform. I think this is I was really excited to see this title and topic, which is why I used this paper for this particular opportunity. I would just like to give a disclaimer that the premises, or the major premise of this paper, is that we have a global political economy that acts as international colonialism. And what I mean by international colonialism is that with the development of globalization within society, former colonial subjects as well as former colonial masters are both part and parcel of the problem, as well as subject to dehumanization and devaluation by our capitalist regime. This particularly focuses on Africa, and it's a pro and Pan-African treatment. So I may read fast, but if you want, you may read along with me. So here's the outline. Pretty much this is what I'll be covering today: African development or underdevelopment, a statement of the problem as identified by me in this paper. This could be false or wrong. I have no problem with anybody believing that. The purpose and key concepts, as well as the design and methodology, significance, and then my main arguments. The main arguments are, despite capitalist development or nominal socialist development in Africa, all states exist in some form of underdevelopment, and underdevelopment using Dr. Walter Rodney's precept and concept of underdevelopment in his book, How Europe Underdeveloped Africa. And lastly, I'll be covering African philosophy and epistemology and asking the question, or trying to get us to consider, is it possible for African theories, current, future, or old, to be applied to economic development and political development within the 54, 55 African states? So, let's see. So the introduction: in the last century, many African states have experienced political decolonization and witnessed the spread of democracy. Considering the global political economy, African states fall within the purview of the Washington Consensus and Bretton Woods institutions, those namely being referring to the establishment of the International Monetary Fund, World Bank, but this also extends to include the United Nations, which developed from the League of Nations. League of Nations was formed in 1920. United Nations was formed in 1945. So right after the post-World War II period, these institutions pretty much established what I consider the international colonial regime, which began or continued the extraction-based economy, which again devalues humans, particularly those who identify as Black or who are identified as Black, and those who fall within the African states or the African diaspora. That dehumanization and marginalization also extends to those in Latin America, those in Asia, as well as people in Europe and North America. However, in Africa, it looks a lot different. So African states are heavily influenced by foreign institutions and nations, and even relegated to secondary status under the current international system. As mentioned, since World War II, African states have either pursued pro-capitalist or non-capitalist, being what I identify as nominally socialist paths towards economic development. Despite either path, African states, their respective governments and economies, exist in a state of perpetual underdevelopment. In my opinion, this underdevelopment benefits and reflects and supports the state apparatus of what is known as Westphalian states, namely America and European states. The study examines democratization, which is the spread of democracy within Africa and the progress of African capitalist and socialist states that have instituted democratic principles while adopting welfare state policies for economic development. And I'm not sure if anyone is familiar with Espen Anderson's welfare state regime typology, but I actually found the typology after I typed the paper, so it was kind of, I think maybe that possibly strengthens my argument, but they identify conservative, social democratic, and liberal regimes that all take different forms and facets under the international capitalist regime. Conservative states can be states such as Austria, Germany, France. Social democratic states can be considered possibly currently Brazil, Scandinavian countries, Finland, Denmark, the Netherlands, and in a few instances even Canada, and liberal regimes, welfare state regimes, are the United States, Britain, as well as other states that have possible structures that take the social service programs that are supposed to be designed for citizens and use the excess GDP, excess wealth that the nation produces and allocates that to serve the citizenry. Because my theory is that African states are pretty much playing monkey see, monkey do with European states in Africa, these solutions are not necessarily viable, and with the agriculture, the rich minerals, the resources that, and the richness of the continent, it's actually kind of a backwards application of using the resources that you produce to subscribe to economic international theories that really don't serve your interests. The intent of this paper is not to advocate for democracy or non-democratic forms of governance within African states, nor is it to condemn African states who have adopted welfare state regimes and policies towards their path towards economic development. The idea is pretty much to decide whether democratic principles as applied along with the welfare state economic development policies can be considered viable solutions for progress. What I mean by progress is similar to the quote-unquote Westphalian states, United States, UK, etc. The excess wealth should serve the citizenry, and it's in my opinion that outside of the deterioration of, again, African states within their economies, African citizens don't benefit from the political and economic decisions of the state, and I think they should. It literally makes no sense that they don't. So I think I pretty much stated the problem, so I'm going to read this one really quickly. Since the advent of the post-World War II international economic system, African states have pursued economic development under the influence of US, Britain, France, Germany, and former colonizers, as well as the World Bank, IMF, World Trade Organization, which is formerly known as the General Agreement on Trade and Tariffs. These economic policies and recommendations can be classified as welfare state policies that are applicable and suitable for non-African states, and they have democratic and political social systems that exist within an international order that benefits from African labor. As we all know, we can say it in different ways, Africans the world over are utilized for their labor, and I believe that labor should benefit them first more than individuals like myself, who happens to be a black man but exists in America. So if I could say that, then anybody who isn't black, I think, should be able to accept half of that. After the periods of colonialism, many African states have pursued democratic political development under the auspices of the United Nations. I think that's very problematic, considering the legacy of slavery, colonialism, contemporary racialism, as well as imperialism that spreads capitalism within our society. So the research study is designed to assess whether it is legitimately possible for African states to use African theory to lead their own development. Concepts such as African philosophy, epistemology, democracy, the welfare state, welfarism, political development, colonization, balkanization, otherwise known as fragmentation, and hegemony are discussed within this paper. I'm gonna skip the design because I think I could share this with you all, but for the purposes of the presentation, I'm not going to focus on the case studies that I use within the paper, which are the Democratic Republic of Congo, Senegal, and South Africa, where I pretty much do a longitudinal study and trace the advent of democracy as applied by the Constitution within the African state. And the DRC is particularly interesting because for those of us who don't know, the first, I believe, Prime Minister of Dominican Republic, Congo, was assassinated under the auspices of the UN, United States, and Belgium, as well as other conspirators. But that would be Patrice Lumumba, who was actually on the record as being the first peacekeeping mission of the United Nations. So I think that kind of sheds light into how the international organizations view African states in terms of them being indispensable. I already covered the significance, so I'm really not gonna spend too much time here. These are the main arguments. African development under both capitalism and socialism each results in economic stagnation and or political instability for African states as they over-rely on the international economic order, foreign states, and multinational institutions. The welfare state is an economic tool and product of the Westphalian economic theory, while democratization is a Western political development strategy and phenomenon that African states continue to apply under the guidance of international orgs. Pretty much short and sweet, Africans can lead their own development. That's why we have African philosophy and epistemology. There's many ways we could say it. I'm pretty sure other people will come up with different things that can be referenced to show that people can be sovereign and self-sufficient. Often the narrative of African states on the economic development path is told from the perspective of Western states, where we overemphasize the incentives that African states can receive. I think that pretty much that's what the media does and has done since it's been in development. Even the media in African nations supports this theory. Considering historical facts such as our stratified society, which uses a social hierarchy based on racialism that was instituted by European leaders, or European thinkers, or European researchers, whatever we're going to call them, based on false narratives and pseudoscience of race, Black people are considered inferior, and many Black people subscribe to these notions. The welfare state, as identified by Richard Titmuss in 1963 in his book Essays on the Welfare State, simplified the welfare state as a state or nation that consists of a central government that provides social services for the nation's citizenry. This form of public policy is based on economic output and productivity of a nation as the aggregate labor of citizens is transformed into wages, income, savings, hopefully investment by the government in order to secure public welfare. I think I said everything else in these points, so I'm going to skip this slide. Democratization is known as economic development and policy reform that work in concert with political, or possibly as a result of political liberation. However, Africa's new democracies continue to experience economic development. In Democratization in Africa, Progress and Retreat, Peter Lewis considers this the democracy development disconnect. And in an essay, Growth Without Prosperity in Africa, Lewis notes, officials and average citizens alike often note the disconnect between macroeconomic indicators and microeconomic performance. Data on poverty and human development are showing few significant improvements, and citizens report discouragement when surveyed about attitudes and economic conditions. This paradox presents a basic challenge for Africa's new democracies. However desirable democracy may be in its own right, political liberalization does not ensure economic regeneration or improved popular welfare, meaning the day-to-day average African citizen or layperson should benefit from the policies that the government institutes. More than that, not to indict the African governments, if these are being prescribed by the EU, OECD, United Nations, IMF, and World Bank, then what does that tell you about those organizations? Just to get to this conclusion, to move on to our other speakers, I apologize for wasting time. As the colonial era gave rise to the independence era and movements that saw Africans vie for nationalist leadership within their respective states, various forms of political development took place. And under the new international order, states like the US and European colonies continue to benefit. The main question here is, that I would love everyone to consider, is it possible for African philosophy to again lead to the establishment of political and economic development? Using this conclusion as a driving and creative force, those who believe in the potential of African states should unquestionably be interested in the capacities of said African states to facilitate and lead their own development without, I guess, the support of anyone else. And thank you once again.